This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 9, May 29th, 2018. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest for this episode is Kunal Mehta, also known by the username Legoktm, who is a software engineer for the MediaWiki Platform team at the Wikimedia Foundation. Since getting involved with MediaWiki, Kunal has been involved in a long list of MediaWiki projects, including the extensions Mass Message, Abuse Filter, Anti-Spoof, Title Blacklist, Global CSS Global CSS.js, Global User Page, Linter, and Echo, all of which are used on Wikimedia sites. He, I think, single-handedly created the MediaWiki code search tool, and until that was released last year, there was no way to do a text search across the code of MediaWiki, its extensions, and related software, something that you'd think would have been available a long time ago. For anyone doing MediaWiki extension development, he may be best known for having spearheaded the extension registration approach, which since 2015 has meant that most extensions are loaded via an extension.json file, which provides a standardized way to specify all the classes, files, etc. of an extension. He is also a member of the continuous integration team and helps develop tools including CodeSniffer, which helps verify that code that gets added doesn't contain any obvious syntax or formatting errors. And I can tell you from personal experience that he does more than just develop tools for other people's extensions. He actively helps lots of extension developers, including myself, fixing problems and doing necessary updates to their code. But what I think would surprise a lot of people is that he's only working part-time for the Wikimedia Foundation and is currently also an undergrad student at San Jose State University, where he's majoring in journalism with a minor in political science. So maybe he should really be a guest on one of those personal productivity podcasts. Anyway, Kunal, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get to the real stuff, I want to ask, are you into Legos?
Yes, I love Legos. I have a bunch of Legos sitting around my room and on my desk. Yeah.
And do you see any sort of connection? This is something I've thought about before. Do you see any sort of connection between Legos and software development in terms of shared interest, or that building Legos is sort of a gateway to software stuff?
I never thought of it that way, but I really enjoy Legos because there's just absolute freedom in what you can do, and you're given like building blocks, and you can do whatever you want with them. And I guess software is similar in that you have absolute freedom in what you want to do.
That sounds right to me, yeah. Could you explain how you got started with MediaWiki development?
Yeah, so I've been a Wikipedia editor since like around 2007, 2008. And it reached a point in like 2011, 2012 when I was filing bugs against Abuse Filter, and no one was fixing them, and that got me frustrated. And someone on IRC, suggested that I submit a patch. And then I submitted a patch for a bug that I wanted fixed, and Ori, who used to work at the foundation, he promptly, deployed my patch, and it turned out that me, not knowing PHP, had introduced a syntax error, and Ori had assumed that I had tested my code and it worked. And then so, it was deployed in production for about 30 minutes, and, anyone who triggered an abuse filter got a really weird error message. And as a result, Ori's like, okay, now I'm going to make you, fix this properly and show you how to test it. And I went through all of those hoops, and then I kind of I got hooked onto it, in that, I could write code and, within a week or two, it would be deployed to Wikimedia sites. And really, I was just scratching my own itch at first, before moving on to other things.
Yeah. It sounds like a real trial by fire, I guess.
Yeah.
Was that your first major development experience?
So I had been a contributor to PyWikibot before that. PyWikibot's just a Python library for MediaWiki wikis, and it generates a ton of edits on Wikimedia sites. But that was just very amateur stuff and, one-off bots that needed to run on Wikipedia. I think that was really my first experience in a large collaborative project.
Yeah. And this was all about 2007?
No, I think like the PyWikibot stuff was more like 2008, 2009, and then the MediaWiki stuff happened in 2012.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then when did you join the Wikimedia Foundation?
I think it was fall 2013.
How did you decide to join? Was it sort of did it feel like a natural extension, or was it a very conscious decision that you wanted to this was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it felt pretty natural. There were like already projects that I was working on that was related to one of the team's scopes. So like I had spent that summer developing the mass message extension, and then in the fall I was talking with a few people at the foundation, and one of them was like, our team is working on this, and we do have some budget for a part-time contractor. Do you want to join? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Because mostly like it was giving me like a formal role, and getting paid to actually do what I was already doing for free was pretty nice.
Yeah. So you live now in San Jose?
Yeah.
That's not far from San Francisco. How often are you there at the Wikimedia Foundation office, and do you have a desk there?
No, I don't. So there's a period of time where I was working full time for the foundation, and I was taking a break from school. So like during that time, I was usually coming once a week to the office. And at that time, I had a shared desk with someone else. But these days, I haven't actually been to the office since the Wikimedia Developer Summit in January. It's just mostly like school's keeping me busy. Even though San Jose and San Francisco are only like an hour away from each other driving, the traffic is terrible enough that I don't really want to drive there, and the public transportation is not good enough to make it convenient to go to. But yeah, that makes sense. I guess there's no Wikimedia bus like there's a Google bus. Definitely not, no.
You've done a lot of MediaWiki related things and have worked in a lot of different groups, from what I understand. What kind of things do you find rewarding to work on?
I think things that just generally make a difference to people, and like, so I know like some of the work I've done has been like very user facing, and you can immediately see how it makes a difference, and that stuff is really fun and rewarding. Like whenever I get a bug report, it means like someone is actually using my software, which I think is really neat. And there's also been some work that has just been like internal refactoring, and no one will ever see this, and this seems like it can be really like boring, going through bad code and just trying to make it slightly better.
Yeah. I've had that experience where it's sort of a mixed blessing to get a bug report. On one hand, of course, you're finding out that someone is using it and is trying to get the software to work. On the other hand, it's a bug, and it can be demoralizing. I don't know if you have that experience of, wishing that there were a more purely positive way of getting feedback or knowledge about usage than bug reports.
Yeah. It's a little weird because like usage tracking for MediaWiki, I think, is very subpar. So like we have Wiki Apiary, but Wiki Apiary only indexes like known public wikis. So like there's a whole host of private wikis that aren't, like, we have no idea how they're being used or like what versions they're running or what extensions they run. And then, at the same time, like MediaWiki is very like a pro privacy focus and everything. So it seems unlikely that we're going to like introduce some kind of analytics tracking software that'll get us the information that we want. to make better decisions. But yeah.
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 Well, if I can give you some positive feedback of the things you've worked on, I make a lot of use of the Echo extension, so I want to say that I have very positive thoughts about that one. I haven't really used most of your others because a lot of them are Wikipedia specific and so forth. But you've been involved in a lot of different projects. In some cases, you've just been a maintainer of other people's code. What are some of the projects where the concept really was yours?
So I think the biggest one was the extension.json project that you mentioned earlier. That one, like, it actually spawned out of a different project. So originally, like, the task that I was working on was, like, implementing a configuration database in MediaWiki. And so, like, the first part about that was, I was just auditing and seeing, like, where global variables used the most. And all of that kind of stuff, because if we want to like store configuration in the database, then, we need to start moving away from global variables to something that, can pull out of a database, some kind of abstraction layer. And, as I got, more like started looking at more code, I realized that like a big problem is that extensions, the entire extension setup mechanism is just global variables. So, like, all of that is dependent on global state. And
right.
that was like the first bottleneck, because like extensions, that you have an entirely different compatibility policy. And you want to, like, the extension setup format, has been the same since extensions were introduced. And like, it's basically like you can do that once, and as long you just keep updating it for whatever your extension needs to change, but like the format itself has never changed. So I thought like, so that was like, okay, we need to change this. And, there were like a few other tasks at the same time that were coming up about how like we wanted to expose extension metadata in the installer. And you really can't like do that without executing PHP code. And, it's a little weird to execute PHP code that the user hasn't like approved to be enabled yet just because it existed on the file system. So
right.
So like the project was like twofold in that. One, we wanted to move away from this like setup using PHP code that can touch any global variable, and two, like move it into a format that other tools can understand. So,
right.
So like that's kind of where extension.json came out of. And for the most part, it was like a very direct translation. Like the global variable name is like the same thing in extension.json. But
right.
there were a few different, there were a few other areas that we, because it's in like a JSON file, and there's a properly defined schema, I think like we've cut down on a bunch of like just common bugs. So like typos are automatically caught by a validator, a schema validator. Like if the key isn't in the list of approved keys, then, it's an error. So if someone makes a typo, we can flag that right away instead of, it'll just create a new global variable. And then, like we can better support backwards compatibility. So, so far, like extension.json has not had a backwards compatibility break. Like there have been like places where like the functionality was just removed in MediaWiki, which is, it's not extension.json breaking it. That's like MediaWiki. And
right.
like right now there are no plans to like, so one of the things we introduced was like a versioning of the schema itself. So there are right now 2 versions. Like version 1 was the first one, and then version 2 was like after a few like versions of usage, we found like common issues, that people were running into, and we, changed a few things to better accommodate for future usage. So like, but there's no plans right now to get rid of version 1 because it works fine, and like the format really needs to stay stable, because I think it's just such a basic thing that really people shouldn't have to continually change. But like in the future when we do want to change, because it's all in JSON in a structured format, we can just migrate everything automatically with scripts.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the format and possibly evolving it, one thing that people have talked about is being able to install extensions from the web interface, and potentially extension.json could be used for that in terms of storing necessary information. I don't know what you think about that idea.
Yeah. So I think there are a few security concerns that need to be thought out and worked around, but I don't think any of them are necessarily insurmountable. I think there are questions of whether it would be a proper special page or whether it would be part of the installer, which runs on a separate authentication system. And then I think the best way to do it is once we have a configuration database in place, the installer just lets you, or whatever web interface, it just updates the list of enabled extensions in the database. And then, when MediaWiki initializes, it gets the list of enabled extensions, and then it can just load all of them with WF load extension. Something like that.
Yeah. Nowadays, most extensions have a bunch of preset files. Besides extension.json, there's also one called package.json, and then a bunch of configuration files for PHP and JavaScript validation. How many of those files are you responsible for?
Well, I think they're a shared. I think the model that we have is a shared ownership of MediaWiki extensions. So most extensions do have maintainers, but at the same time, the MediaWiki group that has +2 over everything really does a lot of shared maintenance. So composer.json and there's a PHP cs.xml file. And so we have a tool called Library Upgrader, which allows people who have access to the account to just mass update libraries, development dependencies whenever there's a new version of CodeSniffer released. And one of the things that we've specifically done, even though it might seem a little backwards and cumbersome, it's reduced our work in the long term, is that all of the development dependencies are controlled by the individual extension. Because previously it used to be we'd just have one version of CodeSniffer that was set globally. And then the problem was that whenever you wanted to upgrade CodeSniffer, you'd break all extension jobs, right, and you'd have to go fix them all at once. Whereas now, because we have everything individually specified in each repository, we can upgrade them one by one. And so if there's one extension, that's not ready to upgrade yet, we can still upgrade 95% of everything else. And a lot of it, because the files are, JSON files or XML files, we can update them by script. So a lot of it is at least semi-automatically scripted.
Yeah. And is that one of your official tasks to make sure that everything, that all of that stuff is currently working, is running?
It's not part of my job description or anything, but it is one of the things that I've been doing for a few years now, and I'm continuing to do.
Yeah. I know another project you've been working on recently is adding support for something called Firejail, which is not quite as exciting as it sounds, but still pretty exciting. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So Firejail is sandboxing software, basically, and so it allows you to run commands in a restricted environment, and it's really just a convenient wrapper around Linux's C groups and namespacing features. But what it does is you can remove root access, you can remove access to certain paths on the file system. You can set memory limits, you can set a few other things. So basically, whenever MediaWiki, shells out to an external command, like ImageMagick to create a thumbnail, we can now run it in a very restrictive environment. So even if someone finds a security exploit in ImageMagick that allows them to say read some arbitrary file. Then, but since we've containered it with Firejail, like ImageMagick doesn't even know that that path exists on the file system. And I think there have been like actual exploits where like they were able to trick, some command by passing in some parameter to like return the value of arbitrary files. And that could be, like if your local settings.php gets compromised, then your wiki is hosed effectively.
Right.
So like it just prevents that entire class of attacks, and it's really just an extra layer of defense. So Wikimedia had actually been using it in its own custom configuration. And so like the main priority was all of the image handling stuff, because that's typically where a lot of vulnerabilities are found. So like ImageMagick, RSVG, VIPs, FFmpeg, all that whole class of things. So what I did was I implemented support in MediaWiki itself. So now like so whenever you like shell out, you call like the shell command class. And then you can call a parameter called like restrict. And then you can say like no root, no local settings, and you can just like say like, okay, in the environment this command will run in, the local settings.php file will not exist in that virtual file system. And there'll be no way that they can gain root access because it just won't exist in the Firejail. I'm pretty sure that for 1.31, that functionality will be on by default if, you enable Firejail. So this way, like this security benefit will basically be extended to anyone else who is, so if you're like running MediaWiki on Linux and you install Firejail and you set the right configuration setting, then you're automatically like sandboxing everything, which is just like an extra layer of security. And the other thing is that there are other tools for like other operating systems, because this one is Linux specific, and this has been theoretically written in a way that if someone wanted to add support for another type of sandboxing tool, it is possible. Whether in reality it is possible, I'm not sure, but theoretically it's possible.
Yeah, that's gonna be that's definitely a big win. You're also involved with creating the MediaWiki packages for Debian and Ubuntu. How much work is that to maintain?
It mostly takes probably like I just prepared the packaging for like 1.31, the upcoming release, and I think it took me about like 10 hours to do.
Wow.
The main thing is that Debian is strict about copyright and licensing. So one of the things that you have to do as packaging is review the changes and keep track of every file's copyright status. So for MediaWiki, most things are GPL version 2 or later, but we also use external libraries in the tarball, and those have a whole suite of different licenses. And then they're like code that's been copied in from somewhere else that is under a different license. And all of that, it takes a bit of time to just like, because effectively I'm just reading through every single file to keep track of the copyright status. And the other part of that takes up time is that like what I try to do is I try to identify errors or like issues that I see that happen like during code review, so that way I don't have to deal with it like after the release is finalized. I'm like, wait, like this is wrong. So I typically look out for like new external files being added and do a license review on them to make sure, it's properly specified, it's under compatible license. Because there has been code that like, accidentally someone committed to MediaWiki and it's, like either under some incompatible license or the licensing statement is so vague that it can't really be construed as even having a license.
Right.
Yeah. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Sorry. Yeah.
Well, so what do you do at that point? I mean, if you can't use some software and you're only discovering that when it's time to package it, what can really be done?
So there have been like two cases where I found this. One of them, it was like very vaguely released under like Creative Commons, but it wasn't really. And then what ended up happening was that file was already deprecated. So I just had it deleted ahead of like the normal deprecation cycle, because, there's a licensing problem. And the other one, the author wrote like BSD license, but there are 3 different BSD licenses. This BSD 2 clause, 3 clause, and 4 clause. And so then I ended up just emailing the author asking, hey, what BSD license did you mean? And,
Right.
Even though this was a project from 2005, he responded the next day and said, oh, it's supposed to be BSD 2 clause. Sorry about that. And that was great because then I could just update it, and move on.
Yeah. In terms of all of this stuff, really, but things like the usage of third-party tools like CodeSniffer, Firejail, etc. Do you take inspiration from any specific other software applications? In terms of how they do their code integration and which specific tools they use and so forth.
So I think so someone else had already started using CodeSniffer as part of MediaWiki, and I think at that time there were no really other alternatives. Today there are at least like 2 other alternatives that I know other projects use. But like WordPress also has a really big usage of CodeSniffer. And in my experience from like having like regularly like survey other options from CodeSniffer, CodeSniffer is the most mature tool out there, for what we do. And we use CodeSniffer for a lot of things. And the biggest feature of CodeSniffer that we use is that it can like automatically fix errors. So that way, like a lot of the common like spacing rules or variable naming rules, like we can automatically identify the errors and in most cases fix them. So like,
right.
Yeah, there's no point in having like a human, look through the entire file and fix all the spacing errors when a tool can do it automatically. I think that just reduces a lot of friction. And then for Firejail, I don't think anyone has ever tried embedding it in, like a server application like we've done before, because when I talked with the upstream developers for a few features that we needed that were missing, they were like, I can't believe someone is doing this. So, yeah.
Really, why were they surprised?
So Firejail is actually intended to be used for sandboxing desktop applications. So like the main usage of it is actually to sandbox Firefox, which is where the name comes from.
Okay.
Yeah, and like Firejail upstream like ships all these configuration profiles for nearly for like tons of Linux desktop applications that you can think of, and whitelists the paths that it needs access to, and they maintain a pretty good list. So I think there are other people who use it to like sandbox things like in a server environment that we do, but I don't think anyone has ever tried like building a restriction framework in a complicated web application, because usually like the web application is the security hole. You don't usually don't trust the web applications you deploy, I think.
Yeah, sure. Getting beyond these, specific technical things, I'm curious about how decision making happens as far as all these projects. For projects where the idea was yours and you need a certain amount of buy-in, how do you manage to get support for your ideas?
I think the biggest, usually it's just talking with people, getting a few other people on board, trying it in a few repositories or projects and then moving it on board for like CI type things. But more broadly, I think the RFC process is a really good one in that, the RFC process like forces everyone to pay attention to you or to your idea because there is a time deadline. In that, like, eventually, like, after a few weeks, if there are no objections raised, TechCom will approve the RFC, and at that point you have, like, you've already gotten the official thumbs up to go ahead. So the RFC process really, it forces people to pay attention, and, it gets people to say their ideas and their thoughts. And I think, the RFC process is really helpful in, fleshing out ideas and taking, good concepts and turning them into good implementations. Like the first major RFC that I really did was the extension.json one. And, if the proposal that I initially put forward, got approved and was implemented with no changes, it would have been a disaster. There were a lot of suggestions and changes that were made during the drafting and discussion phase that really played a key part in making it a success.
Yeah, even the name extension.json came from someone else, no?
Yes, it did. My initial proposal was info.json.
Okay. Well,
yeah. So.
Right. As far as general decision making in the Wikimedia Foundation and around Wikimedia projects, do you have a sense for what percent of them, I guess, come from people like you, sort of individual initiative versus top-down dictates? Does one tend to be more successful than the other?
Broadly, I think, let me think. There are, some projects that are very top-down mandates. Like Visual Editor is a good example, I think. At the time, there's a very big top-down mandate, that we need a visual editor. But at the same time, people at the bottom also agreed, yes, we need a visual editor. This is something that needs to happen. And I think projects that have both, you need management support to make your project a reality. But if the developers, who are working on it aren't in really support of it, then you're going to end up with a weird product. So I think you need both. I don't really have a good idea about other teams. I can speak for my team, the MediaWiki Platform team. I think we're a bit unique in that we have a kind of a broad mandate and wide latitude to make it happen. So the main task we're assigned to, or one of the main tasks that we have to work on is this concept called multi-content revisions. And that's right. This whole project to get Wikidata's concept in Commons, as well as enable a bunch of other technology in MediaWiki. And so some of the projects that, we're working on are coming out of the multi-content revisions, assignment. But, if you'd look at them, you'd probably wonder, how is this related to that? So one of them that recently landed in MediaWiki was the one that, Brad George was working on, called the actor table. And that was, to basically redo how we manage users. Instead of copying the username into every single database table, we'd just have one table called the actor table, which just gives every user an ID, and we store the name, and then every table cares about the actor ID, and that way you can get the name from the actor table. And the reason, that was done, or one of the reasons it was done, was really to save space when we do this giant refactoring, and to avoid us, copying another piece of data everywhere. It was just more of normalizing the table. Okay, right. So the train of thought that I was trying to come to was that, at least on the MediaWiki Platform team, I think we have a decent amount of room to set our own goals and choose our own projects. We also need to make sure they're in service of whatever the annual plan goals are, which have really been set by the whole foundation and community partly. But like, like some of them are kind of broad. So like one of them was just like improving the security of MediaWiki and the whole platform. And so like the Firejail work was really in service of that goal. But I don't think any management person like would have come and told us and be like, we need you to implement Firejail support into MediaWiki. Like that seemed very unlikely to happen.
Right. Do you think the environment has changed for someone new coming in now to MediaWiki development as a volunteer from how it was when you were starting out?
Yes. Both positive and negative. I think the biggest difference is that the foundation as a whole has grown, and as a result, I think the expectations of MediaWiki and the software have increased a lot. So, like, let's say, like 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to have, outages for, like 5-10 minutes, for whatever reason. And I think today that would be entirely unacceptable. And
right.
Yeah, so like in the example I gave, in the very beginning, like my first commit, had a syntax error that caused fatal errors because Ori just went ahead and deployed it. That's probably not something that would be permitted today. Like if you want to just go one off and deploy something, you really need to have a pretty strong reason to do so. It's got to really be like unbreaking something big. It can't just be a feature request. And then, at the same time, this error would have never like made it to production in the first place because we now have really strong linting system. We have tests running. We have this whole suite of, like continuous integration to make sure that it's very hard to land bad commits. So, I think, like in some ways, it's, like the expectations are higher. So like, if you want to get a patch merged in a Wikimedia deployed extension or, or in a MediaWiki core, I think the expectation is that, like you're probably going to need to go through a few rounds of code review, and it's possible that your feature request might just get rejected entirely because it's not something we want to support in the long term, or it just doesn't make sense architecturally. Whereas like in the past, you could write a change that is maybe like 75% correct, and someone would just approve it anyways. Even though it might be like duplicating some other feature or it might be copying something, like there's a much better chance of it getting approved. Whereas today, I think the standards are higher. But on the flip side, I think, things are a lot easier to break in. So, we have like MediaWiki Vagrant, which is like, it brings like a full machine shop of development tools to you right away instead of just starting out with like having to install PHP, Apache. Now all you need is like a virtual machine, and you have like a full integrated development environment. And I think the move from Bugzilla to Fabricator, has made it easier for some people to get started, because you don't need a separate account. You can just log in with your normal Wikimedia user login account, and sorry, there's one more thing I was gonna say. And like all of like the linters and stuff, it's all set up so that way it's easy to run locally. So that way, like you're not going to submit a patch and your code review is entirely -1, please fix whitespace and spacing, to follow coding conventions. It's like you fix that before you even submit the patch in the first place. So that way the code review you get, is going to be about your code and not going to be about how you made a typo or you didn't space properly, which I think will improve the experience for new developers.
Yeah. Moving on from MediaWiki stuff, I noticed that your email address is at member.fsf.org, which is the Free Software Foundation. What is your connection to the Free Software Foundation?
So I'm just an associate member, and anyone who donates the right amount of money yearly gets a cool email address. But I'm a member because I think free software is really important. And I think one of the things for me is that free software, because I was able to develop free software, and that's what really gave me my career as a software engineer. I don't actually have a formal background in CS. So like that was what really enabled me to get started, and I'd like to be able to contribute back and help other people get started in the same way. So really me donating is just because I really support their mission of free software.
I find the divide between the terms free software and open source interesting. In a practical sense, they're pretty much the same thing, of course, but there seems to be a pretty big gap between the types of people who use the two terms. People who say free software tend to have about 20 more stickers on their laptop than people who call it open source, for instance, in my experience. It is sort of a question of whether it's a moral, political issue or a pragmatic one, I think, also. How do you stand on all of that?
So in full disclosure, I have a GPL v3 free as in freedom sticker on my laptop. But
oh, just one.
Yeah, I only have one FSF sticker. Yeah. I have other stickers on my laptop, don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think for me personally, I just tend to say free software because I emphasize the freedom more. I think for me, the most important part about free software is that I can modify it. I can change it. I can redistribute it. I can copy it into my own project and make part of it. Whereas, open source, at least from the name, it really sounds like you can just view the source code, which I think is missing some of it. For whatever reason, the term open source has generally won. It's probably less confusing to begin with. The fact that you have to explain to everyone, no, I mean, free as in free, as speech, not free as in beer. That really just takes away from the messaging. Other people have come up with the term Libre software, which also works. But now you're just not even using English anymore. So that can be confusing in different ways. So, it doesn't really matter to me. Yeah, but I do think it's important, to remember the freedom aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you see some sort of moral imperative to use free software?
Yeah. Mostly in the sense that I don't want to be constrained. Yeah, I don't want to have to give up. Well, I think there's sorry. I think there are just practical issues in using proprietary software, that really make it so that free software is just better. And there's also a moral sense that I am a member of the free software movement, and if I need to support free software, and the best way to support free software is to just use free software, and convince other people to use it based on the merits. I as is life, I do use some proprietary software. My phone has the googly bits on it, that for practical reasons I can't get away from yet, but I think generally in most areas where I have the opportunity to use free software, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I have one hot button question for this interview, and here it is. What do you think of Richard Stallman?
Well, ideologically, I think it is important for someone to be the hardliner and be no, proprietary software is not acceptable under any circumstances. I am glad he takes that position because it is not reasonably possible for me to take that position. His conduct and other issues, I'm not generally a fan. I don't think people should worship him like a cult of personality. I think it would be better if people really just focused on the mission, which is just free software. And the best part about free software is that you can do that however you want to. You don't need to subscribe to RMS's philosophy. If you want to just release all of your code, under like the Apache 2.0 license, go for it. Like, that's still free software. You don't need to use the GPL. I think, it would be nice if you used the GPL, but, like, free software is free. You can really just do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good answer. Very diplomatic. I also wanted to talk about your education. Right now, you're a junior studying journalism and political science.
Yeah.
I have to say that's surprising given your technical background. I think you really should consider going to a STEM field. But what are you planning to do after you graduate?
I don't know yet. I tried studying computer science for a year. I didn't like it. I think the main problem was that we were all studying theoretical things, and I already had all of this real world experience of
Right.
what it meant to write and deploy code on like a top 10 website, and that I kind of got bored really quickly, and it wasn't interesting. Maybe if I had stuck with it, but I'm not really sure. I really enjoy journalism in that it's writing, and I like learning about new things, and journalism is constantly new things over and over again. And I'm kind of interested in potentially like doing some kind of like tech journalism in making like technical news more accessible to the masses, because I do think a lot of current tech coverage by non-technical journalists can be overhyped or undersold, and often it doesn't do a good job of communicating
Right.
things well, and so I feel like I have a good understanding of technical aspects that I could, write for non-technical people reasonably well. But I'm also not yet sure whether I actually want to be a journalist. Being a journalist is really fun. Like I've been a student journalist on like student papers. It's really fun, but it's also a lot of work. Yeah, I have at
Right.
least another year to figure it out, so I'm gonna punt and say I don't know yet.
All right, very good. It's actually quite interesting that you're studying journalism and politics because the nexus of the three things, journalism, politics, and computer science, is actually a very big topic of discussion right now. A lot of people get their news from online aggregators like Facebook, Twitter, and Google, and I'd put Wikipedia in that category too. So there are algorithms that help determine who gets to see what and who gets to even talk in the first place on those platforms, and though the presence of those is a big source of debate and controversy, does that sort of thing interest you?
I don't think so. I think
All right.
I think it's important. So, like from a journalist's perspective, those algorithms have like always existed. Like when you open a newspaper, right, the articles are laid out in a specific manner because
Sure.
some articles, if the editors decided, deserve front page prominence, and some of them are relegated to like the back page with barely any words because the editors decided they weren't as important. But I think that the current way the algorithms are going is that they are designed to give you what you want to read rather than what you should read, which I think are different enough that they're causing problems. So at least like right now I tend to, the way I consume news, which I think like, obviously I do it because I think it's good, is that like, like I have a few specific news sources picked out. So, I read like New York Times, San Jose Mercury News, like Ars Technica, The Intercept, and a few other like specific publications that I've picked out. And that's like typically where I get my news from. I don't really use like Facebook or Twitter. I don't think those are good ways to get news because then you're just going to end up with like, you're going to end up in a bubble. And that's not really that great.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then finally, have you given any thought to whether you'll still be working on MediaWiki after you graduate?
I hope so. I think it's a really wonderful project and a great community. This really made a big difference, and so I hope to be involved in some way or another. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I hope so, and I think a lot of people listening to this podcast hope so too. So you've got that vote in your favor. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you very much, Kunal.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
This has been Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Kunal Mehta of the Wikimedia Foundation, and I'll see you all next time.